Welcome to Grad Chat by PhD Balance, where we talk about topics of grad school beyond academic research and that may be more difficult to talk about in our day-to-day lives. I'm your host, Aiden, and I'm a graphic designer for PhD Balance. Before I go any further, I would like to pay respect and acknowledge that I occupy Treaty 6 territory, a traditional meeting grounds, gathering place, and traveling route to the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and Nakota Sioux nations. If you've missed it, we are now pre-recording episodes for release. All episodes are still available via video on our PhD Balance YouTube channel and via audio on all major streaming platforms. And don't forget to subscribe on your chosen platform to get notifications about new releases. So today our topic is PhD career transitions beyond academia, and I'm excited to welcome our guest, Dr. Holly Prescott. Holly is currently the Careers Advisor for Postgraduate Researchers at the University of Birmingham, UK, and author of the new PhD Careers blog, PostGradual. She completed her PhD in English Literature at the University of Birmingham in 2011. Since completing her PhD, she gained 4 years experience in graduate student recruitment before moving over to postgraduate career support. To aid this move between 2014 and 2016, she went back to studying part-time for a professional career guidance qualification. Outside of work, Holly keeps her literary interests alive as a member of the in-house company at the Crescent Theatre, Birmingham, and as co-artistic director of Ottisdotter Productions in London. We're so pleased to have you on Grad Chat, Holly, to discuss your experiences. That is such a unique background. I love it.
Thanks, Aiden. Thank you for having me. I'm really glad to be talking to you.
All right. So today we're talking PhD transitions, post-PhD transitions. So how about we just start with how did your initial post-PhD job hunt go?
Yeah, good question. What I'll do actually, Aiden, is rather than telling you how my first PhD job hunt went, I'll show you through the medium of some feedback that I
great
interview. So just some background. I went into the PhD very much because I did a master's degree, and in the master's thesis kind of felt like my work wasn't done. I felt like the topic I was working on still had some legs, and I wanted to be the person to sort of carry on and continue that. Got to second year PhD, and I was pretty sure I didn't want to stay in academia. I was more than happy exploring other things that I could do. Could have explored those things in a little bit more detail, but when it came to near the end of the PhD, I kind of had a bit of a scattergun approach. I don't know whether that's an expression that I would use, which means I thought I liked the sound of applying for jobs in arts organizations, cultural organizations, kind of, heritage performing arts kind of sectors, without really knowing too much about them. So here's some real feedback that I got after an interview that I'd had. So I'll read it out. And it says, "Good afternoon, Holly. Thank you for attending recently for interview in respect of our vacancy. I regret that on this occasion you have been unsuccessful. However, we have some feedback for you in the hope that this aids you in future ventures. Holly came across as a little too academic. With regards to every answer seemed to be an essay. If she could be more succinct in her answers, she will be more successful. We also questioned whether she actually wanted this role due to her previous experience and ambitions," which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, because maybe you didn't like your previous experience and ambitions, like.
Yeah, exactly. So I was a bit confused when I got this, because I thought, well, why would I have been going for the job?
Yeah, if you didn't want
it. Yeah. And if my previous work had been academic, if I'd wanted to carry on in that, I would have applied for academic jobs, right?
Yes.
But on reflection, I mean, first of all, I was very grateful to have this feedback rather than just get ghosted by the recruiter, right?
That is so true. Yeah.
Yeah, we've got to be grateful when someone takes the time to give us personal feedback like that. Secondly, though, what I realize on reflection is unwittingly, just because it was my kind of default setting at the time, I was selling myself in interviews as an academic person. So, for example, one question in that interview I distinctly remember was, what does equality and diversity mean for you? All right.
Okay.
The job was to help a local cultural organisation to widen its audience and to bring in a more diverse audience. Okay, so it was based in a part of the city where there's great demographic diversity, but that wasn't reflected in this organisation's audience, and they wanted to change that. So what I should have done was I should have answered that question from their perspective in terms of, so I had experience in engaging an LGBTQ organisation to advertise a research forum that I'd started up. So I had a real understanding of how to work with community groups, kind of raise the profile of new ventures. Those are the things I should have said. But what I said was, I think I went into real detail about Pierre Bourdieu's theory of habitus.
Oh.
Yeah, exactly. And I answered from a very academic, very theoretical perspective. So what I'm trying to get round to here is say my initial job search post PhD, I was sabotaging myself unwittingly by coming at my interviews not from the perspective of the employer and the problems that they needed to solve, but I was still had my academic hat on, and that was people the wrong impression. And and I really changed that and started to think, no, actually, you know, in interview, it's not all about me. It's about what are that organization's problems and how can I help them to solve them. And I would say my initial job search was hindered because I didn't understand that. And once I did, I think then I started to do better, but not before. I'd really started to deeply question myself in thinking, I invested all this time and effort getting really smart. Now no one wants to hire me.
Yeah.
And that feels sad. Yeah.
Yeah. That's so interesting. And I don't think we as students going into the workforce really know how to take that academic hat off and say, I'm just switching my whole like idea of how I'm supposed to interview when we're used to grad school interviews or, you know, research positions. So I think that's such a helpful piece of advice, is to like start thinking with a different thinking cap on. So when you started,
and kind of like reflect on yourself and think, do you have a default setting, right?
Yeah.
Because same would be true for, let's say, someone who's worked as a teacher for years and wants to make a career change into coaching, right? Their default setting is teacher hat.
Right.
Have to learn how to put themselves across, not as a teacher, but as a coach. So it's a similar thing. It's like, have a reflection and think, do you have a default setting in a way that you're putting yourself across and a vocabulary you're using?
Yes.
And is there a mismatch between that default setting and whatever setting the employer has?
Yeah. And for students who might think that's a lot, like to just switch it like that, like you have a lot of experience helping people with that, but think of it in like if you're at a conference and you're talking to so for example, I'm a geoscientist, so sometimes I go to conferences where it's very academic based and I'm just speaking like all my technical terms and stuff. But if I were to go to a conference or do a webinar for, say, something more like resource based, like mining and stuff, they're not going to want to hear all the technical jargon. So I have to switch my thinking cap and be talking to a different crowd. And I encourage the listeners to kind of think that way as well. Is if this seems so intimidating to like be applying for an industry or consulting or anything type job that's so out of our normal realm. But if you think of it as just like selling yourself to a different type of audience that you've definitely done before, it feels a little less intimidating. Anyway, that was just my sidetrack antidote there.
Absolutely.
So when you started your search for jobs after your PhD, how did you decide what you wanted to do? Were there like ups and downs, or were you kind of just applying for everything?
I wouldn't go as far to say I was applying for anything. But what I think I was doing was I was going on vague category. So I thought, what kind of thing am I interested in? I'm interested in higher education. I'm interested in the arts. I'm interested in culture. I'm also interested in kind of like community charity work and things like that. But what I didn't spend too much time doing was really researching those areas and as I've already said, thinking about what were the main problems that were coming up in those sectors, that the jobs that were being advertised were looking to solve. And so what happened in the end was it was a friend who found a vacancy advertised at the university, and it was for postgraduate recruitment officer, which is kind of means someone who attends a lot of events kind of across the country, across the world, and represents your university at like graduate study fairs, right? Trying to encourage prospective students to come to that university to do their graduate school, do their graduate degree and things like that. And my friend said, I think you'd be good at this. You should apply.
Yeah.
And he said he'd done some work with this department and he enjoyed it. So purely just on him being so insistent, I applied for it. I didn't get it, but the hiring manager liked the presentation I gave. And he hired me part-time to turn the idea I'd presented into a project. And it's through that part-time job that I ended up getting my first full-time job, right?
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah. So once I was in some part-time work, I was able to start an iterative process, right? Now, I should have started this process in my PhD, but I didn't. So this is what I kind of advise people to do now, to start this iterative process as soon as you can. And what I call it is a process of thinking about, if you were going to turn whatever it is you're doing at the moment into your ideal job, what bits of it would you want to keep? What bits of it would you want to lose? And what kinds of aspects or activities would you want to add to it that you're not doing at the moment? So whether that you're doing a PhD, you're doing a master's, you're doing whatever it is, if you're going to turn that into your ideal job, what would you keep? What would you lose? And what would you add? And it just starts to break it down for you a little bit. And I started to ask myself that and think, well, I want to keep working with students. I want to keep working in an advisory capacity, but I want to lose the aspect of my job that was kind of salesy.
Yeah. Right? Okay.
Lose that.
Yeah.
And I wanted to lose working on my own a lot. And I wanted to add more time spent with a variety of people in my work, more teamwork and more work-life balance, because I was traveling a lot and things like that. And that just came like a really basic blueprint for me to put feelers out and think, well, what next step would let me keep, lose and add those things? And that's what led me to careers work. So that keep, lose, add, I actually use that with people now, with the PhD students that I work with, and I talk about it on my blog. But I always try to encourage people, think about this as early as you can. Yeah. You're going to turn your PhD into that ideal job, and just think about it, because it can give you such good clues. And also it helps you to think, okay, well, my next job after my PhD, it's not what I'm going to do forever. It's just what I want to add or lose next. And
Yes.
I make it seem less daunting.
Oh, that's amazing advice. Wow, you're really good at your job. I'm sitting here like thinking about all of my experiences and stuff. And if I would have had that advice years ago, I think a lot of things might look different now, but I've just started kind of implementing that type of blueprint into my own thinking. And it's really started to change the way that I'm moving forward in my career. So that is amazing advice. And clearly you are just like rocking it as being a careers advisor in your career. That's amazing. So with you using your own experiences and applying that to your job, how do you use your journey to help PhD researchers now as they're looking to get into the field?
Sure. So I have to be careful because in my profession, you mentioned, Aidan, at the outset, that professional degree that I went back to do part-time,
Yes.
qualifying career guidance. So obviously, once I'd done my Keep Lose ad, I then had to really get an in-depth idea about, okay, if I want to be a careers practitioner, I'm going to have to upskill. I am going to have to invest in further study. And I was in a privileged position where I had the backing, like the savings and some support from my employer to be able to do that. And I appreciate that not everybody does. But yeah, when I did that qualification, I learned the importance of how person-centered career guidance should be. So I have to watch myself so I don't project my own experiences on the PhDs that I'm working with, because we're all different. We all have different situations, and I can't kind of impose that on other people. But what I can do is empathize with the journey, with how daunting it can feel to kind of step off of what can sometimes, I think, feel like an academic kind of conveyor belt almost, or out of an academic bubble, and go into the kind of wild of something that feels very different. So I think with that, the way that I use my journey to help PhD researchers now is by helping them break that transition down into manageable steps. Because if you try to think about it all at once, it's big, right? Yeah. And I think the Keep Lose ad really helps as a starter for that. But something else that I use my own journey to help people is, I think the Keep Lose ad's useful, but on its own, it's not enough. So, I mean, let's say, for example, you're going through your PhD and you're thinking, one thing I really enjoy is teaching. I want to keep teaching. So then you think, well, I should move into a career that involves teaching. I would also say not necessarily. So as well as asking yourself what you want to keep and what you enjoy, ask yourself, why? What is it about that thing that really motivates you and lights you up, right? When I actually look at what it was about that thing I really enjoyed teaching, people could enjoy teaching for many different reasons. They could enjoy it because they love their subject and love introducing it to other people. They could enjoy teaching because they really love public speaking and standing up in front of a room and telling people things and training people. But for me, it was, I enjoyed the actual design of the teaching materials and the sessions, so the design and the delivery. But most of all, it was that I enjoyed creating light bulb moments for people. When a student didn't understand something and then suddenly got it. Yes. When I would give them some examples and then ask a question and I'd get some really interesting responses. That was what I really liked. And so by asking myself not just what I enjoyed, but why, what was it about that thing?
Yeah.
Then that gives you so much more useful themes to use on what you do next. And I realized, so my next work, it doesn't have to be teaching. It just has to be something where I can design some kinds of like sessions or materials and where I can be involved in creating light bulb moments for people. So then I think it would surely not come as a surprise to people that career guidance, then
Yes.
like guidance and counselling and things were the direction that I moved in. So this is where I think what my own journey does, helping me support PhD researchers, is by getting them to drill into not just what they enjoy, but why, what is it is about those things? What are the themes that connect the things that you enjoy? And how can you then kind of take those themes and think, right, where in the labour market could I run with these, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that does. It's almost like you need a keep lose ad list for all of your keep lose ad items.
Kind of, yeah, it's kind of
Like,
meta, yeah.
what do you like about this? What don't you like about this? And then use that to guide.
Yeah. So as well as the what, I think the why is really important.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I love that. So you mentioned like start thinking about these types of blueprints as soon as possible. That can be very intimidating for anyone, you know, starting a new grad program. Like how far along do I have to be to be thinking about this stuff? So is there kind of like, to you, a general guideline or milestone that a student could maybe get to that you would say now is a good time to really think about what you'll be doing after? Because, you know, especially if you go into a PhD program, a lot of universities will have it formatted where the first year or two is barely even dedicated to like your project, but rather a lot of like literature review and stuff. So when you're starting your PhD program, you might not even know what you want to keep loose add. So is there kind of like a milestone or a general guideline timeline that you recommend for students to really start considering this?
Yeah, so I think it's very different in the UK because we don't have any like coursework or
Okay.
exams or things like that as part of the PhD. You sort of just go straight into your project, your thesis.
Okay.
And the PhD full time would probably typically take somebody maybe 4 years if they have a writing up. Yeah, I did mine in 3. Yeah, so I think the researchers that I work with probably have a different timeline to say North America, Canada. But overall, I would say, you know, it does sound cliche to say start as early as possible, but I think a useful mindset is, right, so how can I put this? Yeah. So I think a lot of people can fall into a trap of thinking that the PhD is something that they're doing now and that's happening now. And then career is something that comes after it.
Later. Yeah.
Yeah, later, at the end.
Yeah.
After, right. But if we were going to say, right, let's think about your transition from master's to PhD, right? Or from your last job to PhD. Were those two things completely separate from each other? And they probably weren't.
Yeah.
It's likely that your ideas for your PhD grew out of your master's program.
Yeah.
Out of your master's thesis, or out of the work that you've been doing if you're coming back into a program after you've had a career, maybe. Mm-hmm. I know for me that was true. You know, my PhD grew out of my master's thesis. Then it was doing my master's where I came into contact with the ideas and the theories and the people that led me in the direction that I did in the PhD.
Absolutely.
So why not think about career in the same way? Right?
Yeah. And that's something you can start in the beginning.
Yeah, exactly. So just like a PhD is something that emerges out of a master's program or emerges out of a job you've been doing. Think about career as something that emerges out of what you're doing now.
Yeah.
Yeah. It emerges out of the things you're trying out now. It emerges out of the people you bring yourself into contact with now and what they do. Yeah. What fields do they work in? So then from that, you can start to think about, oh, what would I want to try? What might I want to try next? What might I want to learn next?
Yeah.
Like you would if you were continuing from master's to PhD. Yeah, you the same kind of things you can think about to figure out what it is you want to do next. So all I'm trying to say there is I don't have a timeline for you, because, you know, I appreciate you've probably got listeners in many different countries where the program is structured quite differently. But my one piece of advice would be that don't think about the PhD and the career as these two kind of mutually exclusive things. Think about it like that, like just like the PhD grew out of what you've been doing, the career grows out of what you've been doing as well. So there's really no start and end point. Your career is always happening, and
Yes.
and it's being aware of that. It's being self-aware, being aware of that, reflecting on that, and therefore thinking, well, how do I want to prioritize the things I say yes and no to move myself into the directions of what I might want to try next and what I might want to learn next.
Yes. So what I'm hearing is there's no timeline. Start as soon as possible, but start smaller. You know, you know what you want to do when you're going into this project, but in your first 6 months, what do you hate about it? Maybe you hate reading all these papers. Okay, well then maybe a job that involves you doing a ton of research, like literature review type research, isn't for you. Maybe you hate doing certain type of field works or doing certain type of projects. Then you can slowly start like chipping away your keep lose ad list and growing it from there.
And then if you realize the things you are more drawn to and that you do get your energy from, and you find yourself kind of doing more of that than the others, then you can start to seek opportunities where you could take that further. For example, if you're really enjoying things like report writing and things like that, then maybe you could seek a policy internship where you'd be writing policy briefings and try that skill out in a different setting. Does that make sense? Because the earlier you're thinking about this, the earlier you're then able to spot the opportunities that let you take that enjoyment further. And the more you're then actually trying stuff out, low risk, whilst you're still in the program. And then you've got loads of evidence then to base your decision for your next steps.
Great. Yeah, no, that makes total sense. Especially the idea of your career and grad school being not mutually exclusive, that they are blended in a way. When I think about career after grad school, I think, oh my God, it's this huge like next leap, but really it's taking the next little step and little larger step and little larger step that we've taken ever since attending university at all. You know, you've decided on a degree, you've written an honors thesis, you've applied to masters, etc. So it's just taking those little steps, and I think it's important to remember that just kind of like bring yourself down from it and think about it smaller. So you mentioned this earlier about selling yourself and presenting and selling yourself to a different type of audience. So how would you suggest that PhD students sell their skills to employers outside of academia when all they know is an academia background? Are there resources? Are there certain like skill sets that you might recommend, or any type of advice in general?
Well, I would say that by becoming an expert in your academic discipline, you have learned the language of that discipline. And if you've learned the language of your discipline, you can learn the language of another, right?
Okay, yeah.
So basically, you know, you by doing a PhD, I think you have become good at, okay, right. So let's say we've got someone who's doing a PhD, and they're doing it in, I don't know, theoretical physics. So they've become really good in speaking the language of theoretical physics, right? And they can speak to other people, other physicists, and they understand that language and they're really hot on that. And again, yeah, that's like having learned a language of an industry, really. And it's just applying that to other industries. If you've done it once, you can do it again, I guess, is the encouragement I would give to people, rather than to think, oh my word, no, all I can do is what I know.
Yes.
It's like, well, no, you've learned one language, you can learn another, especially if you've done like an interdisciplinary PhD. So let's say you started off in physics, but then you moved into maybe kind of like microwave engineering, and then you went more over to the electrical engineering side, and you've been flexible. There you've probably learned multiple languages of multiple disciplines. So it's still a exercise, really. So people can be very skeptical about the language we use here when we say sell yourself. I try to move away from that, because I think that can actually be quite daunting for people. So instead, I think, right, how can you understand what different audiences need, and how can you tell a story about yourself that presents you as someone who can meet those needs, right? So it's emotional intelligence, almost, really understanding what does who's my audience, where are they coming from, and what are they going to be most interested in? Because sometimes what you want to say about yourself and what academia has maybe trained you to think is the most interesting and the most and the best bits of yourself may not be what the employer thinks are the best bits. So it's understanding that, really. So I think you've got to, in order to understand the needs of your audience and talk about yourself in a way that is in tune with those needs, I think first of all, you need to know what you have to offer. You need to really think about, what are you good at? What are your interests? And what are your best pieces of evidence for that, right? Evidence, yeah. So once you've worked that out, those things should resonate with the roles you're going for. Because if they don't, then there's probably a mismatch.
Right.
Fundamentally, you got to reflect on, what do you have to offer? And what is it? What parts of you do you want to bring to the work you'll do next? But then next, just as importantly, you've got to consider the employer as well. What are their needs? So every job that comes up for a reason, right? It might, for example, a department wants to launch a new course. It might be, like the example I gave, that a cultural organisation wants to diversify their audience. It might be that a company wants to research and launch a new product, or support a group of people better, or break a new market, or whatever it is, right? So you need to be able to understand what those needs are. And then selling yourself is you showing the employer how you can help them solve those problems. So it's more about them, really, than it is about you.
I see. Yeah.
Or it's equally, it's as much about them.
Yeah.
As it is about you.
Yeah. You're not just talking about all of your greatest attributions and things, but how can those be of help to the company, and in a way of like, how would they benefit from you? Not how are you just going to be a good employee, and I also,
so for example, it's like, let's say you're wanting to move from, say, doing a kind of STEM PhD to, let's say, working in an area like patent law. So you could tell the employer, you could say, you could put on your CV the title of a journal article you've published, and then the name of the journal.
Yeah.
Then the employer could say, great. How is that going to help you deal with our clients?
Yeah.
So instead, you then get sort of worked on problem X, submitted successfully submitted manuscripts to an academic journal for publication, demonstrating excellent command of written English and exceptional attention to detail. And then they're like, oh, great. Those need to be a successful patent attorney. Yeah. And you've done it to the level where you've managed to get something published in this internationally acclaimed.
Yes.
Great. So you see there, it's like you're in the first version that we talked about, just putting the journal paper and the journal name, you're kind of assuming a lot of prior knowledge from the reader of your CV that they will understand what that title means, what that journal is, and how prestigious it is. Whereas in the second version, you're interpreting that journal article that you've done, and you're extracting from that some things it shows that the employer is going to be interested in. So that's just an example there about the difference between things that when we're talking to an audience speak for themselves, but things that when we're talking to industry audiences need unpacking.
Yeah, I definitely understand that. I think I'm still, for lack of better words, slightly traumatized from when I did a presentation during my master's. And so a little background on me, I did my master's and then upgraded to PhD. And at the time of recording right now in November, December, I am mastering out of my PhD and quitting that and pursuing a different career altogether. But when I started near the end of my master's and was transitioning to PhD, I had a idea of like the project and everything. Like it was all the same project that I was going up to PhD for. But I had a very technical or like academia sense of it, like this is important for these reasons of other academic research. And I remember doing a presentation, and one of the professors in the audience kind of asked me, like, he didn't say it exactly like this, but he may as well have said, why does it matter? And that question has just haunted me, because I mean, in that moment, I was doing a presentation on my research to the students in my department. It wasn't supposed to be for any other type of crowd, but that has really followed me through to other presentations, like the antidote I was telling you earlier, with going and presenting to like a very resource-based geoscience community. All they care about is like, how much can we get from this type of deposit? Why does groundwater matter for this type of deposit? Like stuff like that. And here I am presenting on my research that is not really anything to do with like mining or any type of like hard rock geology, but I'm presenting to a mineralogy and mineralogical community. That's what they care about. So I'm trying to like sell myself, quote unquote, sell myself to them so that I don't get that question, why do we care at the end? And then at the end, they say, wow, that was really useful in understanding your research as it applies to our interests. And I think when you're applying for jobs, you have to think of it that way too. As students, we have done all this research, but how can that help the fields that you are wanting to go into?
And there, Aidan, you gave a great example of what I said earlier, which is you've learnt to speak those different languages.
Yeah.
In that and you've done previously.
I was forced to. Because I didn't want to be caught having that type of question in a setting where it would be like embarrassing, or, you know, if someone asked me that during that presentation, I would have been like, oh my God, I would have been stumbling. And so for students who are like looking to, oh my God. So for students who are looking for like how to change up your skills of presenting, like I encourage you to say, like, what if I went and presented at this conference right now? How would I change it? Or if you're doing like a webinar or something. Also, attending webinars is really helpful in like learning different types of languages that different sectors use. Because everyone kind of has a different one, but anyway, that's off topic.
But if I was going to kind of just wrap this one up, what I would say is, so let's use those examples. So going back to the example I used at the start when I was in that interview, answering the question about what equality and diversity means, or if you were in front of that audience of people who were into mining, right? And you were, and let's say you were just, like you say, talking about your research, but in a theoretical way that didn't mean anything to you. It's kind of like, right, you're thinking about, it's like you're speaking to an audience that really want hats, right? They really want good hats. That's their bag. They really want to buy a hat, right? But if you don't adapt the way you speak to them, it's like saying, hey, look, I know you really want hats, but I'm a shoe. Look who I am. I'm a great shoe. But then they're like, but we don't care about shoes.
Yeah.
We don't even wear shoes in this industry. We want hats, right? So don't be the person that tries to tell people what a good shoe you are if your audience actually want hats.
I love that. That feels like the most perfect thing to end on too, as we wrap this up, because like I'm trying, I can only give as many personal antidotes for students to try and relate to. And you are an amazing careers advisor who is giving so much amazing advice during this episode that has me like rethinking everything. But really, yeah, don't be the shoe when everyone just wants a hat.
Exactly.
How can you make this shoe into a hat?
yeah, exactly. Or how can you actually just, let's leave the shoe aside and take what I learned about making that shoe into making a great hat.
Yeah, love it. All right, before we end here, is there anything else you'd like to mention, talk about, promote?
Sure. So the main thing is my PhD careers blog, where I cover a lot of the things we've talked about today, including the Keep Loose ad structure, working out your next steps, transitioning into think about moving from academia into other sectors, selling your skills and all kinds of things like that. It's called PostGradual, and you can find it at www.phd-careers.co.uk.
Great.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Holly. I really appreciate it. So to wrap this up, this has been Grad Chat by PhD Balance. Our episodes are now posted simultaneously on our podcast and YouTube channel Saturdays at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. To find our podcast episodes, just search Grad Chat on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcast. You can connect with PhD Balance on our website at phdbalance.com or on social media on Twitter and Instagram at PhD_balance. Until next time, have a great day, guys.